Hello everyone. Today I thought I'd try out this Tascam for a little bit of lo-fi love. And today we're going to be unboxing the Nintendo Switch OLED Edition. Now, I have a Nintendo Switch, but around Christmas my father made a joke about asking if I had gotten him a Switch, basically. And he's not normally one to play video games, but he seemed kind of excited. So I decided to get him one. Now, I'm not quite that great of a son. I've decided to, instead of just flat out buying my father a Switch, I've decided I would upgrade. So I got this OLED Switch actually for me, and I thought, I'll transfer over all my saves and such and give my old Switch to my father, because again, not being much of a gamer, I don't think he would appreciate the difference, and I had been thinking of upgrading anyways, so this was a great way to give some use to the old console. With the backstory set aside, let's go ahead and crack this thing open. Now I've got kind of a bit of a janky setup today. That was a bit loud. I've got a bit of a funny setup today. I've got this little platform here, and I've got, just off screen, I've got the Tascam sitting on the platform, and I've got overhead my phone as a video camera, so we'll see how this goes. I am suspecting I'm going to need to cut more and more of the actual box opening, because it's quite loud. Oh, that's a good sound. Yeah, that's nice. Okay. I've got the box itself open. You can see I got the white Joy-Cons, because I really like the white look. I think it's very, very clean. This is in total contrast to my previous Switch, where I really was celebrating the playful nature of the console, and I got the red and blue V1 Switch way back when it launched. Admittedly off of a somewhat sketchy guy on Craigslist, but well, the serial number ended up being valid and matching the one that was on the receipt, so hopefully I didn't support any crimes. Anyways, let me set this to the side. And here we have the console itself, so we just slide that out of the packaging. Here we have the Joy-Cons and the actual console tablet body itself. So pull that out, and I appreciate it's got a bit more heft to it. It's a little heavier than the original V1 Switch. Corner over here is catching. There we go. Here it is. already marred by my grubby fingerprints. Nintendo Switch. Now they've made a few design changes. Actually, I'll get to those later. They've made a few design changes, but we can do a bit of a side-by-side comparison later on. For now, you might hear the stones around my fireplace. When they get hot, they start to expand and make these cracking noises, which can be quite loud, but I let it pre-warm a little bit, so hopefully it's not too intrusive. So we'll take the console and we'll set that to the side. And then we'll go about extracting these Joy-Cons. There's the one. And there's the other. Now, I was one of the great many people, I believe, who suffered so dramatic, who experienced the phenomenon of Joy-Con drift. In particular, my left Joy-Con from my original console was absolutely unusable for Super Smash Brothers. Just because the left stick was perpetually stuck off, tilting right. Not the stick itself, of course, but the registration against the system. And so I verified this. I went into the Joy-Con calibration, and from the calibration menu, I held the Joy-Con stagnant. I shuffled the stick around a bit, and then I let go, and I just watched what happened to the calibration screen, and sure enough, I would see that the little blue-green dot would slowly tilt to the right. Slowly move right, and so the effect this had on games was unfortunate. I would be playing Smash, as I mentioned, and all of a sudden my character would just start sprinting over to whatever foe I was facing at the time, and made the game a lot more difficult than I think it was originally intended to be. As such, I've still not completed the single-player experience in Smash, and we're going to blame it on Joy-Con drift instead of just me being bad at video games. Pull that off. Ooh, this is interesting. The plastic on the Joy-Con is... Maybe I can scratch a little bit. If you, I know this can be a bit nails on chalkboard for some people, so if you're not a fan of scratching on matte plastics, you may want to skip ahead. But you may be able to tell from the sound, as I mentioned as well, the plastic is this rather matte finish, somewhat sanded. It's not smooth like the original console, like the original series of Joy-Cons. That's a little surprising to me. Triggers feel exactly the same though, as do the click buttons, the D-pad. The thumbstick is a little more plasticized, a little less rubbery. It's not quite as soft. It had the original Joy-Cons have a bit more sort of squish to them. Or I'm completely making all this up, or fabricating it in my mind. Which is, I suppose, also completely possible. I've recently been playing, and I know it's not cool to admit this, but I've been recently playing and enjoying very much Pokemon Brilliant Diamond. Now, Generation 4 was my first Pokemon generation. That's Diamond and Pearl and the Capstone Platinum. Now, I played Diamond and Platinum, and my younger sibling played Pearl and Platinum, and we had just the time of our lives. It was our first Pokemon game. Until then, our mother insisted that Pokemon was too violent, which, from an outside perspective, I understand. Being sort of glorified magical cockfighting. Despite that, we firmly enjoyed it. We were about the right age. My younger sibling was perhaps, oh dear. My younger sibling would have been perhaps 4 or 5, and I would have been 7 or 8, I suppose. And so they were very much of the Pokemon age, and I was not too old at all to appreciate it, though I was of the age where video games were no longer quite so purely magical. They became more of an optimization problem, a question of how do I build the best teams, and what's the most effective way to catch a pocket monster. And so, ooh, I like this. This is the little release button that triggers. Let's see if we can visualize this. This button pushes down a little plastic latch inside the Joy-Con that allows it to be released from the back of the console. So I was around the age where you start metagaming and you start figuring out most effective strategies. And they were not quite. They were still engrossed in the magic of these interactive fantasy worlds. So we both got a lot out of the Pokemon Gen 4 games. But in different ways, which I think is lovely. I think that is a testament to how incredible a medium video games can be. Anyways, so a large part of my enjoyment, I believe, of these recent Gen 4 remakes is the nostalgia factor. And that I believe they are rather faithful recreations of the original. I just bonked the camera. A bit. I was saying I believe these games are rather faithful recreations of the originals. Perhaps not perfectly so, but they don't need to be perfectly identical to the original games. And I think they also don't need to differ too tremendously. I found they hit the right spot of nostalgia for me. Now, of course, they weren't quite as beautifully sophisticated as far as AAA titles go when compared to Super Mario Odyssey, Breath of the Wild, or even other recent remakes. The Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire remakes, for example, were perhaps a little more technically ambitious. Despite this, I thoroughly enjoyed Brilliant Diamond. I went so far as to shiny hunt the box legendary Dialga. And it took about, I got rather lucky with it, admittedly. It took about 1,200. My counter was probably off, but my counter at the time read 1,256. And knowing me, that probably means it was closer to 1,240 attempts, soft resets, getting to the boss fight, getting to Dialga, and saving the game, starting the encounter, checking if the Dialga was shiny or not, and if not, resetting and doing it all over again. But the payoff was worth it. I did indeed manage to get a green boy. A green agender time god, as it were. And that was the first time I'd seriously shiny hunted a Pokemon. And of course, it's not really the best way. Normally you would prefer approaches that involve something like the Pokeradar or other simplifications that make shiny hunting more of a technique and less of a retry 4,096 times and hope you get lucky. But for me, that sort of what would the word be? That sort of grind was very enjoyable. It was a nice thing to do while falling asleep. I would do a soft reset, hit the clicker, and do it again and again and again. Keep an eye out for the green instead of the blue. And eventually it paid off and I did get the shiny. Now, we've got the console out, but there remains more in the box. The box includes a USB-C charger and an HDMI cable. Let's pull out the cables, the grip, and the dock. This empties out the box. Let's start with the dock. Now, this was something I was rather excited for. I had many sleepless nights staying up, watching restock trackers in order to get a PlayStation 5. And when I saw the OLED Switch has this white dock, I was very excited because it matches the PlayStation 5 beautifully, which I think will look very nice on my mantle. Fully recognizing how lucky I was to manage to get the console at all. Let's see if we can pop the back cover open. There we go. So here we see the console has a AC adapter, an HDMI out port, and a LAN adapter. Now, a LAN socket to allow wired internet access. Now, I believe on the original console there's also a USB power port for pass-through power. It might actually even be a data port, I'm not certain. Let's click that back into place. It's a bit noisy. It's also got this beautiful curved design here, which was not present on the original. All in all, I think the Switch OLED Edition is a slight step up design-wise from the original console, which, as it should be, it came out several years later. They had plenty of time to iterate on feedback. This is the Joy-Con grip. I find this is not extremely practical. It's a little sort of flimsy feeling. Not terribly manufactured, but it feels a little cheap. And I find, well, frankly, I find I most often play the Switch in handheld mode. But when I'm playing on a television, I prefer a third-party controller, like a PowerA controller, just because the form factor is a little more familiar to my hand. This has kind of an awkward flat feel to it. The depth of the grip is not particularly deep, so you kind of stub your fingers on the back of the Joy-Cons, and it's not my favorite grip. That said, I still prefer it to the Switch Pro controller. And then, of course, we have a standard HDMI video cable and a USB-C power cable. This is the cable that is direction independent, so you don't have the micro USB problem of, does it go in this way? No, flip it. Does it go in this way? No, flip it. How about this way? It's always the third try for some reason. It's always the first way you try, but it never works the first time. You have to flip it twice before a USB cable fits, it seems. Not so with the USB Type-C. Now I'm going to go ahead and grab the original console, and we can compare the models. Now, here we are again with the Switch OLED Edition and the version 1 Switch. As you can see, they're very comparable in size. Maybe you can't see because I'm still figuring out how this camera business works. As you can see now, they're very comparable in size. The Joy-Cons are the same format. That is to say, the old Joy-Cons will work perfectly well on the new system and vice versa. They're the same size and shape, although, as I mentioned, the plastic material seems to be different. This seems to be a matte finish, whereas this is a semi-glossy finish, meaning that this feels a little more grippy, a little more tactile on the OLED version. The body of the consoles are almost identical. The Switch OLED Edition is perhaps a tiny fraction wider, I will say. Maybe it's taller. It feels slightly bigger, though that is also amplified by the screens. Now, it may be a little tricky to make out on video, but the screen on the original Nintendo Switch has a bezel. It's a flat bezel. It's recessed behind the plexiglass, or the glass in any case. But it's got about a centimeter here, and maybe a third of an inch here, and a centimeter here. So there's quite a bit of plastic behind the glass around the screen on the original Nintendo Switch. Whereas on the OLED edition, there is a very thin border. There's maybe half a centimeter on either side, and maybe a I would say it's only 3 or 4 millimeters on the bottom and top, which means that the screen real estate on the OLED edition is quite a bit larger. Not so much larger that you would need to worry about upsampling, as was the case with the DSi XL and the 3DS, the new 3DS, the new 3DS XL, which is was it the new 2DS XL? I forget. I don't think there will be as many upsampling problems as there were on the DS line. However, there will be, because it is a 720p console, a little bit better clarity, independent of the screen technology. But speaking of the screen technology, the main difference between these consoles, as far as marketing is concerned, is what illumination technology they use, what they use to get the pixels in front of you. Now, the original Switch, I believe, uses a traditional, oh dear, I'm going to get this wrong. I believe it uses a traditional LCD, liquid crystal display. Now, please don't quote me on that. There's in every likelihood I'm entirely incorrect. However, I believe, as of right now, I believe that to be the case. The new Switch, the new OLED Switch, uses OLED, which is, if I remember, again, please don't quote me on this. I am a software engineer, not someone who works with hardware very much. The OLED Switch uses what I believe is an organic LED, which in effect means that the blacks are actually black non-illuminated spaces, as opposed to a backlight shining through where the pixels are set to black. The organic nature comes from a compound used in these light-emitting diodes, which has... frankly, I don't remember. They're always marketed as more vibrant. For me, the only real difference I see is that OLED tends to wear down a little more quickly, but more crucial, we're still talking on the order of tens of years. So more crucially, it's those blacks, those OLED blacks, where there really is no illumination coming through. It's gorgeous. It's what allows watching ASMR videos in the dark without searing your eyes, and what allows greater depth of color because dynamic because the dynamic coloring, the feel of the color is so much richer. There's greater contrast between the blacks and the whites, and therefore between the colors as well. There's a bigger distribution. I'm thinking of those color graphs that you get when you're examining an image in Adobe Lightroom or any Camera Raw software. That kind of distribution, they're pushed a little further out, which I think makes for a richer color experience. Continuing to examine the distinctions between these consoles. On the back, this was what was surprising to me earlier. On the back, you see the kickstand on the original Switch is a rather flimsy, small little piece of plastic that underneath it is tucked the microSD port, and that's where you put your storage card. The new OLED Switch, it seems that the kickstand has been replaced with a full back kickstand. Oh, beautiful. And instead of this little plastic, clicky plastic hinge, it's got this very resistant, compound hinge that's it allows me to position this at any orientation instead of just click open, click shut. And of course, the microSD port is still there. So I suppose this means that on the OLED edition, you could orient the kickstand as so, all the way up. That is still self-supporting, so there's quite a large degree of freedom of positioning with this device, which makes tabletop mode, as they call it. Switch has marketed, or Nintendo has marketed 3 modes for the Switch. There's handheld mode, which is fairly intuitive. There's docked mode or TV mode, and then there is tabletop mode. And tabletop mode is what they've implied you're doing when you pop open the kickstand, detach the Joy-Cons, set it on the table, and hand one over to your friend. So, I've never found tabletop mode particularly viable on the original device, and perhaps I can show you why. We kick that little kickstand open, we set it. You may be able to tell just as I set this down, watch the wobble. Now keep in mind, I'm setting this on a padded surface, and even with that, I don't know if you can see, oh, there we go. The right corner there kicks itself forward, because being only supported here, it's really sort of turning the device as you set it down, and it's not a very stable position. So I've not been a huge fan of that. With this, I could see actually using tabletop mode. I have to say, obviously being quite privileged in that I am able to afford this upgrade. If you have the extra $50 and you are considering getting a $300 Switch V1 or V2 or a $350 Switch OLED Edition, I have to say the build quality is nicer. The finish, it really comes through in the finish. This hinge is incredible by comparison. So if you plan on using the tabletop mode at all, I mean it's a hazard on this version of the Switch. But of course, these two consoles do run all the same software, all the same games, and either one will get you by perfectly fine. There's also the Switch Lite, though I don't really recommend that particular device. It's feels quite a bit cheaper, lacks the same battery life as its bigger brethren. If it's your only option, if you're getting it for a child, or if you're on a very restrictive budget but you really want to get a Switch for your relaxation, then perhaps. But I would strongly recommend getting one of these consoles. And if you were planning on using tabletop mode at all, definitely the OLED edition. Frankly, I'm perfectly happy with my original Switch as well. The color depth is a little less, so if you're using it only in docked mode, the original Switch is perfect. Save the $50. If you're only using it on the television and you're not using the built-in screen, don't pay for a better screen. There's no reason. But if you are using handheld mode extensively, if you really, really care about the finish on the Joy-Cons, perhaps it's worth the extra $50 investment. For me, someone who entirely uses handheld mode, or almost entirely, I am very happy with the OLED edition. It's much heftier. It's got a better feel in the hand. The matte finish and the plasticized finish on the joysticks, rather than the rubber finish, it just feels nicer. And of course, the little tiny bit of extra screen real estate, the extra, what would that be? Probably a centimeter, maybe even a centimeter and a half the extra screen real estate here is, I expect, going to make quite a difference when it comes to handheld play. I can't wait to experience Mario Odyssey on this version. And with that, I think I will let you go and start transferring my files over. So I hope you have a wonderful insert time of day here, and I'll see you in the next video.